Both Trump and the Republican House Oversight Committee chair claim that he's been completely exonerated by what's in the Epstein files. But there's no truth to that statement. First of all of the Epstein files still have yet to be released, and most have yet to be unredacted, so we don't really know exactly what's in them. And secondly, what's in them doesn't actually look good for Donald Trump. It's just that he and members of his party are deflecting and distracting from the less savory allegations present within instead of investigating them and finding out the actual truth behind some of these lurid allegations. Americans and people everywhere are demanding answers about what's in the Epstein files, over 3.5 million of which have been released in recent weeks by the Department of Justice. But Republicans repeatedly are trying to make this a partisan issue instead of getting to the bottom about who and what is alleged in these files, regardless of their political party. And the House Oversight Committee chair, James Comer, basically reaffirmed that when speaking to Fox News recently.
Here's what I guess angers me about the whole thing at the top is not one time did Attorney General Merrick Garland ever answer a single question about these files. Why?
Well, the Democrats didn't care about Epstein until someone had the notion that Donald Trump may have been involved. And what we've seen from the millions of documents that have been released is that Donald Trump is completely exonerated in the whole Epstein saga. But what we've seen is a lot of honestly unfinished business with respect to Epstein and the crimes that he and Maxwell committed, any potential co-conspirators, and holding people accountable. I'd like to note what Britain charged Prince Andrew on, what they arrested him on, didn't have anything to do with sexual crimes. It had to do with potential treason. And that's one of the questions that we have in our investigation is how was Epstein able to surround himself with so many influential people like Prince Andrew and the Clinton family and others in Saudi princes and people all around the world? And was there any type of spy ring that was going on? That's a serious question that's never been answered, and hopefully we'll be able to get the truth.
Well, he seemed like a guy that wanted to be around famous people, Bill Gates among them. I mean, I'm not sure if you're going to bring him in, but I guess what frustrates me is because Democrats, we've now learned that Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, at post-conviction, with his local conviction in the state of Florida, they were still asking this guy for money. And, for all the talk about Donald Trump 25 years ago, or around 25 years ago, he threw this guy out of the Mar-a-Lago club, which in, society in Palm Beach is a big deal, and did it publicly. He humiliated him. If the guy had anything incriminating on Donald Trump, I'm sure we would have heard about it a long, long time ago, right?
That's exactly right. That's what all the former attorneys general have said, Bill Barr and Merrick Garland and everyone. If there had been any dirt on Donald Trump, that would have leaked out because Donald Trump has that many enemies in the Department of Justice, in the deep state apparatuses that were supposed to be investigating Epstein. So with respect to Trump, I don't think there's anything there. And I think that if you look at Epstein and who the real bad people were, the real bad people were the ones who continued to communicate with Epstein after he was convicted the first time. And that's where the real bad behavior took place. That's where you have to really question anyone that was ever around Epstein. If you continue to associate with Epstein and Maxwell post the conviction in 2010, then you have some questions that need to be answered. And we're looking at what the Department of Justice did. That's one of the things I've been doing, going into the Department of Justice, looking at the unredacted version of the documents. Who all has the Department of Justice questioned before? And obviously we deposed someone this week, Lex Wexner, who was one of the
There's so many things wrong with what James Comer is saying here that it's hard to even know where to begin. But let's start with the claim that Trump was exonerated in the over 3.5 million files released by the Department of Justice so far. There is no way, no realistic possibility that James Comer or any other single person has read through every single one of those 3.5 million files in the last few weeks. It's going to take years for independent researchers and anyone else to actually get to the bottom of just what is in these files. Not to mention that the files have been so heavily redacted that we still don't even know exactly what's in them. So there's no way that you can claim that Trump was exonerated in these files. What Comer is doing here, and what the Department of Justice has created the perfect setup for, is manipulating their audience. When you release a tranche of documents that no one person can realistically go through, and then you make claims about what's in those documents or what those documents prove, there's no way for people to double check whether you're actually right or wrong. So, this is a premise that is essentially, at this point in time, unsolvable. But what we do know, and what I'll get into in just a second, is that the mentions of Trump in the Epstein files raise more questions about his culpability in criminal wrongdoing than they answer. But in addition to that, what Comer is doing here on Fox News is he's continuously refocusing the questions of accountability and co-conspirators around Democrats. They're focusing on the Clintons. They're focusing on Bill Gates. They're focusing on what Merrick Garland was doing under Biden's term. And those are good questions, but they don't negate any culpability that Donald Trump may have in the matter. It's a transparent, partisan attempt to refocus the bipartisan nature of the allegations within the Epstein files against one political side, and in its attempt to clear Republicans of any wrongdoing, when in fact, even if we're focusing on just people who communicated with Epstein after that 2008 conviction, high-profile Republicans are still incriminated in these files. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are two great examples of this. They are tech billionaires who have repeatedly supported Donald Trump and conservative causes. Elon Musk was practically embedded within the Trump administration in just the past year and allowed to make sweeping cuts to funding and numerous other changes despite never being elected. And he was in the Epstein files post 2008. Steve Bannon, at one point one of Trump's closest advisors, was speaking with Epstein up until the day he was arrested in 2019. So there are plenty of Republicans and close Trump allies implicated in these files, in addition to Trump, even if you sort of tighten the restrictions like the way that James Comer is doing here. And finally, they're claiming that the deep state and people within the Department of Justice would have found and exposed any dirt that had to do with Donald Trump because supposedly the entire government is so turned against Trump that anyone would rush to smear him. But the reality is, Todd Blanche, the acting deputy of the Department of Justice, who's in charge of so much of this release of the Epstein files, he has served in a personal capacity as Trump's own lawyer, defending him in and outside his office of the presidency. So the Department of Justice doesn't have anything against Donald Trump by nature. In fact, the Department of Justice has loyalty to Trump. There's a reason why they might be hiding or obscuring or deflecting from things that could incriminate Donald Trump. But Trump has already reiterated these claims to claim that he himself is exonerated when no such exoneration has occurred.
Peter, what do you think?
I got a question about something big overseas today. The former Prince Andrew arrested by the police there, related to something with Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think people in this country at some point, associates of Jeffrey Epstein, will wind up in handcuffs too?
Well, you know, I'm the expert in a way because I've been totally exonerated. That's very nice. I can actually speak about it very nicely. I think it's a shame. I think it's very sad. I think it's so bad for the royal family. It's a very, very sad. To me, it's a very sad thing. When I see that, it's a very sad thing to see it and to see what's going on with his brother, who's obviously coming to our country very soon, and he's a fantastic man, the king. So I think it's a very sad thing. It's really interesting because nobody used to speak about Epstein when he was alive, but now they speak. But I'm the one that can talk about it because I've been totally exonerated. I did nothing. In fact, the opposite. He was against me. He was fighting me in the election, which I just found out through the last 3 million pages of documents. Yeah, please. Yeah. Please.
You said today on Iran, bad things will happen.
So now we have Trump claiming that he has been exonerated by the latest release of the Epstein files, even though no such thing occurred. But it's because of this manipulative logic and reasoning coming from people like James Comer. Trump is also claiming that Epstein worked against him and didn't want to see him become president at all. But that's not the full truth. Epstein was constantly in communication with political figures on both sides of the aisle. In the years after Trump was elected president the first time, Epstein even gave Steve Bannon, Trump's former advisor, advice on how to favorably frame what Trump was doing on the world stage. So he wasn't entirely against Trump's presidency, nor was he against the rise of far-right authoritarian powers around the globe. It's something that he talked about frequently, including in European countries. The way that Trump feels about the Epstein files and the crimes alleged within them couldn't be clearer than when he says it's a shame and it's a sad thing that figures like Prince Andrew are being arrested, or even when people like the Clintons, his political opponents, have to testify. Trump isn't sad about the crimes against women and children because of Jeffrey Epstein. He's sad that other powerful elites are in the process of potentially being held accountable for him. So no, Trump isn't exonerated. He's on the same side as all of the people, including himself, who are mentioned within these files and had long-term relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. This idea that Trump was exonerated in the Epstein files is patently absurd when you consider that he's mentioned within them thousands of times and is in fact one of the most prominent and regularly mentioned people within the Epstein files. But when asked why Trump doesn't have to answer any questions about that, Republicans like Comer deflect to say that the Clintons should have to answer questions or Bill Gates should have to answer questions, when the reality is that all of them should have to answer questions. And in fact, Comer even says that Trump is answering reporters' questions around the Epstein files. But as we just saw, Trump isn't answering them in any sort of productive way. He's just claiming that he's totally innocent. Trump has also repeatedly made conflicting claims about when and why his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein ended. So when Comer trots out the line that Trump cut off Epstein completely prior to that 2008 conviction, there's conflicting evidence either way. And when reporters like CNN's Caitlin Collins have pressed Trump further, he's turned to personal attacks. Famously, he told Collins she needed to smile more after she asked for more details about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And speaking of those 3.5 million plus documents released by the DOJ, the ones that are heavily redacted and cover up a lot of information to do with alleged perpetrators and co-conspirators, they've also yanked some of the documents that had to do with Donald Trump shortly after they were released to the public. Some of these documents containing salacious allegations of sexual violence against Donald Trump were in fact pulled from the Department of Justice's website without any further explanation. So the Department of Justice isn't in the business of trying to expose or smear Trump, they're actually trying to protect him. And again, considering that some of the DOJ's current leadership have been employed by Trump in a personal capacity to represent him, that shouldn't come as any surprise. And when you take a closer look at these allegations that were unceremoniously deleted from the Epstein library, it becomes very clear very quickly why the president and his allies don't want anyone asking any further questions or looking into these allegations any further. And by refusing to do so, by refusing to interview witnesses or release any follow-up information about investigative steps they may or may not have even taken, the DOJ and the FBI are deflecting from these allegations. They're not giving the public a clear answer on what we can and cannot believe because they're not doing the legwork to prove or disprove anything that's being alleged. Some of the allegations against Trump within the Epstein files, some of the ones that were then removed after the public already found them, include things like sexually assaulting children and being present for other children being murdered. There was an allegation of a quote sex trafficking ring at the Trump golf course and allegations of systemic child sexual abuse happening involving Trump and some of these other high profile conservative figures. And again, when these powers that be decline to investigate allegations further, we then can't really say what's credible or what happened or where the truth lies. And that's by design. This is something that happens to survivors of sexual violence every single day. If authorities refuse to do their jobs to investigate, if prosecutors refuse to prosecute, if lawyers and politicians and other figures in power choose to cover up these allegations instead of pursuing justice and accountability, then survivors are left with nothing, and the public is left unable to say what really happened and what didn't. That allows for the manufacturing of statements like Trump was exonerated, when the reality is that no judicial process ever even occurred. And the Department of Justice is now claiming that all of the Epstein files have been released in line with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which, as a reminder, only passed because of the efforts of a few Republicans who broke from their party ranks to support Epstein survivors and the Democrats who were pushing for these files to be released publicly at all. If it weren't for those efforts, we wouldn't even have the Epstein library or these files. So now the same DOJ is claiming that all of the files are out there and their work is done. But independent investigations have surmised that they probably only released 2% of the overall information they had, in direct and clear violation of the law. But who's going to enforce that when you have the president of the United States claiming that the job is done and he's the one who's been totally exonerated? Instead of continuing to chip away at the Epstein case, Republicans are now trying to swivel focus entirely to continue to distract and deflect from what's in them. They're looking at an entirely new set of files, which ironically came into public focus shortly after former President Barack Obama gave a podcast interview with Brian Tyler Cohen.
A couple questions here. Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the president of the United States.
What was the first question you wanted answered?
So this seconds-long sort of throwaway Q&A at the end of this much longer, much wider-reaching interview with Obama has captured a ton of interest on social media. And Trump, other Republicans, and MAGA influencers are actually using it as a jumping-off point to try to turn the public's attention to a different set of files they're calling the alien files. Trump posted on Truth Social that, quote, "Based on the tremendous interest shown, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena and unidentified flying objects, and any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters." Then you have White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt quoting it, "out of this world news from President Trump." Since then, Pete Hegseth has posted about this. Some of the Republicans in Congress, including ones who were previously posting about the Epstein files, they've started posting about this. And of course, MAGA influencers are going wild posting about this. It's very obvious what all of this excitement around the alien files is distracting from. The Epstein files, of which there is still new information and new discoveries coming out of every single day. Academics, reporters, independent investigators, and just members of the public have been dissecting and analyzing and going through these files, and they will be for quite some time. There's still plenty of new information to be gleaned, and again, more questions than answered about what Trump's role really was with Jeffrey Epstein, the type of behavior they actually got up to, and whether or not he's actually incriminated by what's in these files, not exonerated. The reality is very stark. You can't be exonerated from an investigation that never actually happened. But if you just claim you were exonerated enough times, your devout supporters might believe you. And if you do whatever you can to distract from the fact that you haven't been exonerated, then maybe people will start to lose attention and interest. But based on everything else we're hearing about the Epstein files, that is not the case whatsoever. I really don't think that people are going to just forget and move on or accept at face value this idea that Trump has been exonerated. That's clear from the chatter, not just on social media, but also offline. The people are demanding answers, transparency, justice, and accountability. And Trump is not going to be able to escape that as easily as he can just claim he already has.